You're listening to Checkered Past. Checkered Past is a series of 13 stories that I wrote. It involves a lady who sets up an antique store in different towns, basically her front yard, full of all kinds of collectibles, antiques, and junk. She is visited in each town by someone who stumbles on her by accident, buys something from her yard that's going to change their life forever. The first story is called Diver Down, and it involves an amateur diver who finds a sign in her front yard that goes back to 1935, and it's the sign that hung in front of an old dive shop down in Islamorada. And he has to have it, and he buys it, and things change drastically in his life. I liken these stories to Antique Roadshow meets The Twilight Zone. Enjoy. "So you're a diver," said the exotic woman. "I am. I've been diving for 20 years. Got my black card, Dive Master." And that, he pointed to the painted wood, is a beautiful sign. She smiled and brushed the coal-black hair from her face. Smoothing her pastel-colored smock, she reached out and touched the weathered board. Islamorada Dive Shop, 1935. She pointed to the faded blue and white paint on the sign. This sign was hanging outside of the shop. Over the years it got beat up pretty badly, but that's the beauty of it. Running his hand over the sign, he said, "This red bar with a white stripe, it means Diver Down. If a boater comes near and sees that flag, they slow down and go around the area. They know there's a diver below." "Man who sold it to me said they find gold Spanish coins off the Key." She offered him a faint smile. "I've never dived in the Keys," he said. "It's been a dream, and to maybe find a gold coin or two." "So you're interested in the sign?" "Actually, I shouldn't tell you. I should show disinterest and move on and then come back to it. The price would drop considerably, right?" He laughed. "No." She didn't laugh and turned and walked toward the rusted trailer, a determined stride to her step. If he didn't see the value, he wasn't the right person. This sign, this message from the past, needed to call to a special someone. Wait. She kept walking. "Lady, I want this sign." $700, she said. That was a lot of money. They were behind in the mortgage, still buried in that house in Hamlin Plantation near Charleston, and paying minimum on the credit cards. Their financial picture wasn't the best. Of course, if he had a job, things would be different. A little steep, but the sign was so cool. Diving back in the 30s, finding shipwrecked artifacts, gold coins. She turned and continued walking. "Would you take 6? He shouted. He couldn't afford even $100. What the hell was he thinking? She stopped and turned slowly. "Please," she said, "realize that my livelihood does not depend on you or your negotiating. People who shop here are more than happy to pay the price, and the price is $700. I could go 6. He seriously couldn't. Linda would kill him. "Go 7. It's worth it." She gave him a stony glare. He froze. She spoke with authority, like if he didn't buy the sign, his future was doomed, like she knew something. "Okay, do you take credit cards?" "Cash." "Who the hell carried that kind of cash? $700. He did. He actually had $800 in his wallet, money made from the sale of one of his guns just an hour ago. His prized 1872 Colt single-action revolver with the wooden handle and engraved barrel. A sale to a collector. He was going to use the money to add to the mortgage payment, but then he'd seen this hand-painted sign advertising antiques, and he turned off the dirt path, and what the hell was he thinking? The Colt was far more valuable than some stupid sign. What would Linda think? 10 minutes later, she watched him as he drove his van down the dirt path that led to the main road, the van that carried the $700 dive shop sign. Charleston was a stone's throw, and he'd probably be home in half an hour. Walking up the wooden steps, she entered her trailer. Her pet, Rose, watched from the glass cage, her furry body still and waiting. The spider lady took silver tongs and reached into a small white cardboard box on the kitchen counter, pulling out a white worm and dropping it into the spider's cage. The tarantula watched for a brief second, then pounced, her hair-covered legs grabbing the worm, and in a flash she had devoured the creature. "You're welcome, Rose," the spider lady said. "You know, we've been friends for a long time. I know that. Past lives that sometimes come to me, like the ghosts that visited Scrooge." Looking out the window, she surveyed the sun-drenched yard, sparsely covered with grass and weeds, mostly covered with an eclectic assortment of oddities. A cast-iron stove, an oak dresser, over there a gasoline pump from a Texaco station, and up by the porch a tandem bike, the tires as flat as pancakes. "We're in the people business, Rose. We help direct them." Over 100 items, strewn haphazardly around the lawn, for everyone, she thought, something to change your life forever. Linda was at work, her Chevy Volt missing from the carport. Strange to have her as the only breadwinner in the family. He was laid off, for all intents and purposes fired after 15 years as the head buyer for Lumberjacks. Downsizing, they'd told him. His job, his retirement plans dashed, and everything they dreamed of was gone, as if those dreams had never existed at all. Pulling the weather-beaten sign out of the van, he gazed at it. It was from another time, another century, back when standard dive equipment was a bronze helmet and a bulky canvas diving suit. A simpler time, an escape to the past. He carried it into the brick house, wondering where to hang it. He hadn't thought this out at all. Finally, he set it on the floor, propping the heavy wood against the wall in the spare bedroom. Linda was going to be so pissed. He'd promised her the proceeds from the gun would go to the mortgage. Not going to happen. He had 3 more guns, but none as valuable as the Colt. Maybe he could sell those. His cell chirped, and he saw it was Linda. "Bobby, they asked me to close tonight." "So you work till 9, then close the store?" Hartford Jewelers on Berkshire, where she made $8 an hour plus a small commission. Not enough. While she was making it, he was spending it. "We can use the money." And here he was buying expensive antiques. "Okay, see you then." It had been cold between them, frigid at times. The lack of money did that, as if any marriage needed extra pressure. There was enough pressure just getting along, and now they were on a strict budget, giving up dining out, skimping on everything, even toilet paper, for God's sake. Cheaper brands, peanut butter sandwiches. He thought about just walking out, but he had to stay somewhere, and he certainly could afford 2 places to live. So they existed and worked on saving where they could. And now this. He looked at the sign again, from 1935. Isla Morada Dive Shop. The diver down signal painted in red across the board. The paint was faded, but the letters were crystal clear. There must have been a lot of stories that came out of that shop. Divers from decades ago who visited sunken ghost ships, followed tropical fish as they darted here and there, divers who dreamed of finding a coin or other treasures buried by a coral reef. He walked to his laptop in the living room coffee table and ran a Google search for Isla Morada Dive Shop. Maybe somebody had done a history of the establishment. And it popped up immediately. There was a brief story of the shop, 2 paragraphs speaking to the historic significance of the spot. But more to the point, the establishment still existed. He felt a chill, a lone outpost on Dogwood Lane. The site even had a photo of the small building. The outside was aluminum and appeared to have been re-sided in recent years, and the sign above the door was larger. But there it was. How cool. Now his sign had some significance. He ran a search to see how far Isla Morada was from Charleston. 10.5 hours, 650 miles. He smiled and walked back into the spare bedroom, staring at the board. It was just a painted piece of wood, but for him, it seemed to embody a mystical quality, capturing 80 years of Florida Keys history. There was surely no one living who would remember the shop from 1935, but the business would probably display some historic memorabilia. How cool to tell the current owner that he owned the original sign. And maybe he could take this sign down there, offer to sell it to the proprietor. Now, that was a good idea. $1,000. It would pay for his trip down, plus he'd make back the $700 he'd paid for the wooden slab. The year 1935 was painted white inside a black circle at the bottom of the sign. Why wouldn't someone want to buy back part of their history? He was sure they could afford it. Islamorada was the self-proclaimed sport fishing capital of the world and world famous for its diving. Reef diving, wreck diving. It was a diver's paradise. So the dive shop was probably doing very well. And maybe if he offered to sell them the sign, they'd let him take a dive at no charge. He could make that part of the package. A dream of his since he started the sport, and maybe a chance to bring back a coin, a souvenir. A good trade. Gold Spanish coins plus $1,000 for his sign. It was a fantasy, but the chance that it could happen was very real. In his mind. 10 hours. It was 5 p.m. right now. With gas stops, he could be there by 4 a.m., get a room, visit the dive shop at 10, and be back in Hamlin Plantation by the next morning. He'd have the money he'd promised Linda and a lifetime experience. A dive sponsored by a shop that was 80 years old. It all sounded good. It all sounded doable. He dialed the number on the computer screen and after 4 rings, heard a voice saying, "You've reached Islamorada Dive Shop. We're open 7 days a week from 10 till 5. Please leave a message," and he hung up. Throwing his toothbrush, a pair of boxer shorts, jeans, and a swimsuit into a travel bag, he picked up the piece of wood and walked to the van. In such a short time, he'd grown very fond of the sign. It spoke to him of history, of magic, of romantic adventures. It was time to visit its origin. Picking up his mask, regulator, and wrist computer from the garage, he put them in the back. He could use one of their tanks and flippers. The drive was exhilarating. He filled up twice and worked out scenarios in his head. Start the price at $1,200. He'd have money to pocket to pay for his motel. He could drive in his sleep, and thank God he didn't. But 10 hours went by quickly. Internet radio with sports and comedy channels, a variety of talk radio and music all played in his mind. And he had called Linda a little before 9. "Bobby? Yeah, you're working late, so I'm going south to visit a collector. He's not offering much, but he wants to see the other guns." "Well, that would help." She paused. Anything would help at this stage. It's never enough. A moment of anxiety. Yes, it really would help. "I'm staying over, so I won't be home until tomorrow. I'll call." She never even questioned where he was going. At this point, she didn't even care. It would be good to get away from each other. Too much pressure. It was 5 in the morning when he wheeled into Pelican Cove Resort, a motel at the water. He paid for the room with his almost maxed-out credit card, and he was in bed by 5:15. He was tempted to drive down to Dogwood Lane and see the shop in the early hours, but exhaustion took over. Just 5 hours of sleep, and he'd be off to see the Islamorada Dive Shop. He slept for 4. Waking without need of the alarm clock, splashing water on his face, he looked in the mirror and studied the circles under his eyes. His pale skin appeared stretched on his unshaved face, and his gaunt appearance frightened him. It was probably just the lighting in the bathroom. Although he hadn't been eating much and his sleep was sporadic, it was taking a toll. 50 years old, hadn't seemed that old several months ago, and now he felt ancient. No job, no future, and 50. He needed to concentrate on the moment. The GPS got him there with no problem. The crushed shell parking lot crunching under his tires. 2 cars sat in the lot, and several battered dive tanks were propped against the building. Nothing special to see, and yet it all seemed special. With his dive sign in the van, he felt a unique connection to the past. A bell rang when he opened the door, and a scruffy young man behind the counter never even looked up from his tablet. Glancing around the small store, he saw a wall covered with regulators, hoses, dive computers, and masks. New, used, everything was for sale or rent. Colored tanks in several sizes were clustered near the door. Yellow, silver, green, and even 4 pink ones. Racks filled with wearables ran through the middle of the shop. Wetsuits, swimsuits, and a collection of T-shirts with memorable slogans. He'd seen most of them before. Life's a beach, and then you dive. Live each day as if tomorrow you might dive. And the one that hit close to home, no phone, no boss. At 130 feet, a different kind of pressure. He picked out a medium-sized maroon shirt, one that simply was stenciled Agua Morada Dive Shop, established 1935. $22. Well, if you sold the sign, it would be at least one souvenir. $22 used to mean nothing, not a thought several months ago. Now he had to consider the purchase. Hey, life was a bitch, but then you dive. Walking toward the glass counter, he glanced in the far corner and saw a mannequin garbed in dive gear, a copper helmet, and a bulky canvas bodysuit. Apparently, they did appreciate some history. The kid finally looked up, absent-mindedly pulling his long hair back. "Can I help you with something?" "Yeah, is the owner around?" The young man stared at him for a moment. "What, do we owe you money?" "No, I just wanted to talk to somebody about the history of this place." It wasn't going at all like he'd imagined. "I'm the owner, me and my brother Tony." He stuck out his thumb and pointed toward the rear of the store. "You aren't trying to sell us advertising, are you? Geez, you wouldn't believe the guys who try to sell us magazine, radio, newspaper, television, internet ads." Bobby shook his head. "No. What do you want?" "I bought a sign." He suddenly felt very vulnerable. He'd driven 10 hours, planned how this conversation was going to go, and already had a plan for the money from the sale. The original sign for this shop, one that hung outside. It's from 1935. "And? Would you like to see it?" "Sure, I guess." The kid guessed. Speaking of signs, not a good one. "I'll be right back." He knew in his gut he should turn around and head for home. He was just wasting more and more of their money. He was an idiot. The kid had no sense of history, didn't care about anything other than his tablet and today's take. Cradling the wooden sign in his arms, he re-entered the store. The guy was glued to his tablet. "This was the sign that hung outside your door in 1935, he said. "Cool." He barely glanced up. "Cool?" This was the history of the store. "I thought you'd be more interested." "Tony," the kid called out. "Yeah, Drew." An older version of the tablet boy came out from a back room. "You like history? This guy has a sign that was used when they opened this place, back in the 30s. Tony looked at the sign, running his fingers over the rough wood. "Cool. I drove down from South Carolina to see if this place still existed." "It does," Tony said. "Thanks for sharing." No. I wanted to know if you guys wanted the sign. It's part of the history. I mean, yeah, Tony took it from him. "Thanks, man. Nice gesture." Damn, this was not going well. "I paid a lot for that sign. I would sell it to you for $50. Tony looked at Drew. "We could go 75. It might be kind of cool to hang in here." No, I paid a lot more. I'll sell it to you for $1,000. I mean, the original sign that hung in front. No, man, let's be realistic. We're here with or without some stupid sign. I see no need." "You seriously have no interest?" Drew looked up from his tablet. "Dude, that's some serious capital. 10 dive tanks for some piece of wood? It's not doing a damn thing to pay the bills. Think about it, dude." Frigging dude? He'd been thinking about it for almost 24 hours. "So you have no interest in this?" Tony looked at his brother and shook his head. "No, man." He grabbed the sign from the brother's clutches. "You guys are crazy. This could be a centerpiece in this store. There's a history here that this sign represents." $1,000? Dude, you have got to be crazy. Bobby took a deep breath, and another. The brothers watched him as if worried he might have a stroke. He'd been crazy to buy this stupid sign. He'd sold a collectible Colt revolver and turned around and bought the stupid sign. What the hell was wrong with him? He was doubting his own sanity. "What's your bottom line?" He needed a sale. Dear God, please, a sale. He needed $700 plus gas and a hotel room. $100, Tony looked him in the eye. "It's not worth more than that to us." "Gas station up the road offered me $500, he lied. Said it was part of the history of the key." "Good advertising for us. Sell it to them." Bobby shuddered, thinking about the financial hole he was digging. 2 tanks full of gas already was probably $160 round trip, plus $120 for the hotel room, another $40 for food, and this stupid T-shirt, which he was going to buy, not to mention the $700 for the sign itself. Linda would be so supportive. well over $1,000 for a little jaunt, and he was still going to dive. Screw it. He was in over his frigging head, but he was in Isla Morada, and damn it, he was going to dive. He was going to dive. Forget Linda. Forget the mortgage and forget the credit card debt. He was going to dive. An hour later, he was suited up. He'd spent the last $100 from his gun sale, and they'd agreed to take him out on a dive. He showed them his Black Master diver card, and he'd shown them his logbook, and they'd given it a cursory glance, and Tony agreed to take him out on their boat. Geared up, Tony sat on the rear seat. Dude, if you have a problem, I'm ready to go in, okay? Bobby nodded. Over there, it's about 15 feet to the coral reef. Shallow dive. It'll go down to 40 feet a little further out. Watch the bottom. A year ago, 2 guys found 3 gold coins. How much were they worth? $200-300 each. Depends on their condition. They show up down here more than you'd think. So there was a plan. Just find 3 gold coins, sell them, and no problem. If only life were that easy. You can see that pier right there. That's the Marcassa Resort. We're just a quarter of a mile out. He nodded and grasped his flashlight, rolling into the water. Hundreds of small silver fish schooled past him, their bodies shimmering in the morning sun that filtered down through the still water. And 30 seconds later, he saw the reef. Muted blues and greens and outcroppings that rose here and there like a miniature mountain range. Kicking his flippers, he propelled himself to the coral, startling a flat fish that was easily the size of his head. The fish stared at him for a second, then with a swish of its broad tail, was gone. A small black striped red fish swam in a circle, and a green and scaly creature crawled along the bottom. Like a personal aquarium, he thought. A rock to the right caught his attention, its surface made of hundreds of ridges. Swimming over to the large boulder, he examined it. The ridges were circular, and the rock appeared to be made of these ridges all fused together. He scratched the surface and saw a metallic glint. He scratched again and aimed the beam of his light on the area. He was certain it was a coin. Grabbing the ridge, he tugged. There was no movement. Holding the flashlight tight, he banged it against the boulder. A dozen ridges gave way and drifted to the ocean floor. He powered his way down and scooped them up, his heart racing. He was gulping in a lot of air, and he couldn't afford to do that. Relax, settle down. 12 corroded gold coins. 12 coins. And hundreds more where those came from. What the hell had he stumbled into? He swam back to the boulder, the rock of coins, and studied it. Maybe the coins had been in a chest, and as years ate away at the wood, the coins became corroded and stuck together, just as they had been in the chest. And recent divers, hundreds of them, passed over the object, thinking it was just another coral formation. Oh my God, he shivered. Millions of dollars in front of him. He could find this place because you could still see land, the pier on the Marcassa Resort. Oh my God, call Linda. Tell her he was going to be late by a couple of days. He could rent a boat, come out here with a canvas bag, and start hauling in the loot. Oh my God. He tapped the coin rock again, and another 6 or 7 coins fell. He grabbed them up and stuffed them into his trunk pockets. $5,000 or $6,000 in his pocket. This was the dream of a lifetime, a frigging fairy tale. Send Linda the mortgage and enough to live comfortably for the rest of her life, and take the rest. Travel the world, buy a Caribbean island, or maybe go back to Charleston and start over with his wife. Anything he wanted. Checking the wrist computer, he noticed the air pressure. Time to surface. He couldn't say a word to Tony or anyone. He'd read that the state of Florida confiscated a large portion of any treasure you found, and that was not going to happen. This was his find, his treasure. He shot to the surface, breaking the surface of the water and looking around. No boat. The son of a bitch had taken off without him. His last $100 and his safety net were gone. Tony had sailed. He wasn't going to let this destroy his euphoria. What bothered him most was he'd traveled no more than 200 or 300 feet, yet there was no pier. No Marcassa Resort. Should have been right there, where he now saw palms and palmettos. With a sigh, he inflated his BC with air from his tank, so he was buoyant, and slowly swam toward the shore. Thank God for the current flowed that way. Otherwise, he'd be pushed out to sea. Damn Tony. He couldn't wait to confront the little bastard. Walking up on the beach, he stripped off his gear and laid it all next to a palm tree covered with palm fronds. He stared offshore toward the boulder of gold, then turned and started hiking, back through the mangroves, the palms, finally to a dirt path that promised some destination. He needed some shoes. The hot coral sand and dirt burned his feet. A man wearing a straw hat, white linen shirt, and white pleated pants was walking toward him. "Can you tell me where Islamorada Dive Shop is located?" The man stopped and stared at him. "That's the new shop on Dogwood Lane. You a diver? You don't look like a diver." It was hardly a new shop, 80 years old. "I just need to find the place. I have an issue with the owner." "Johnny Sebastian? Nice enough man. Sorry you have an issue. You go to the main path and 2 blocks north, okay?" He ducked his head and kept on walking. Nobody named Johnny Sebastian owned that shop. He'd been scammed by the current owners, brothers Tony and Drew, and to his knowledge there was no Johnny Sebastian. He kept walking, just a swimsuit, t-shirt, and bare feet, and gold in his pocket, a lot of gold. The main path was nothing but gravel. He'd driven down Main Street, and that had been paved. This might be further south than he'd navigated. Still gravel? Staying on the side of the road was easier on his feet. The sand was warm, but easier to walk on. An antique black 2-door sedan drove by, the driver waving and throwing up a cloud of dust. There were no other cars visible. It was then that he heard the train whistle, 2 long blasts, and the puffing of a steam engine not too far away. Where the hell did a train come from? Finally, he saw the store and Dogwood Lane. Not the same store, but in the same place, and his sign. They'd hung it out in front. Islamorada Dive Shop, 1935. So they were going to buy it after all. And when did they have time to take the aluminum siding off the building? The outside was all wood. As he got closer, he studied the sign. It had been repainted. How? The blue and red colors were vibrant, and it appeared they were painted on a brand new board. There was no sign of weathering, none. So in the brief time he'd been gone, these son of a bitches had copied the sign, hung up one of their own. His fists were clenched, and he felt somewhat lightheaded. Walking up to the door, he peered around the parking lot. His van was gone. A beat-up black 2-door that looked like something out of the 30s or 40s was parked where he had parked. His phone, clothes, everything he'd brought down was in that van. He shook his head, not believing what he was seeing. This morning, he was out for one last adventure, and now, except for the gold, everything was falling apart. He pushed the door open and walked into the store, and it wasn't a store at all. It was a diving museum, and he was faced with an array of strange helmets, air hoses, bulky canvas bodysuits, and equipment he'd never seen before. There were no racks of wearables, no computers and wristbands in glass cases. This was brand new equipment from some time long ago. "Can I help you?" He was beyond help. Speechless, he kept staring around the shop, trying to get some bearing. "Sir, is there something I can do for you?" "This is Islamorada Dive Shop, right?" "It is." "Welcome to my store." A balding man wearing thick glasses stepped from behind the counter. "But I was here this morning, went on a dive. One of the owners took me out in a boat, and I am the owner. Rest assured, no one here took you out on a dive, sir." No, my van was parked outside in your parking lot." The man shook his head. "I can guarantee you're mistaken. I'm John Sebastian. I'm the sole proprietor of this establishment. I'm also the sole employee at the store. I've been open to the public for 6 weeks. I know almost everyone who's walked through that door." 6 weeks? Bobby croaked. Obviously he was dreaming. Standing here, still wet from the dive in his bare feet. He was dreaming. "Yes, sir, the building's been here for several years. Once was a lawyer's office, but that sign that hangs above the door is 6 weeks old, almost to the day." "What year is this, sir? Please, what year is this?" Sebastian stared at him for a moment. "This is the year 1935, Labor Day weekend." "Oh, my God. Don't mess with me. I've been through a lot recently. Sir, please don't take the Lord's name in vain in this establishment. The year is certainly 1935. He reached into his pocket, pulling out one of the coins. "Can you tell me what this is?" "You asked some strange questions, sir." Sebastian studied it, rubbing his thumb over the rough, corroded edge. This is a Spanish doubloon. Where did you find it? Not important. I just wanted to make sure. How much is it worth? I think around $40. There are at least 1,000 coins down there. Maybe more. $40,000 in gold. Closing his eyes, he tried to absorb the impact. No car, no phone, no Linda, and $40,000 worth of gold in 1935 terms. I know these questions are very strange, but he hesitated, trying to put it all in an organized thought. Can you tell me how much I could make if I got a job down here? Bartender? Someone who, I don't know, maybe somebody who works in your shop. I have no concept of what the wages are down here. If I were to look for a job, maybe with a lumber company, how much could I earn? The owner once again shook his head. Fellow, I don't know what you're up to, but I want to know where you got a shirt that actually spells the name of my store. He stared at Bobby's chest. If I told you, you wouldn't believe me. You've never been here before, yet on your chest is the name of my store. How is this possible? He looked around the room at the dive suits and brass, copper, and bronze helmets, contraptions he'd never seen before. Looking down at the floor, he saw his bare feet were standing on a gray rug pulled over an oiled wooden floor. Please, Mr. Sebastian, tell me what is an average wage? Things were spinning out of control. Maybe a man down here could make $1,200, he said. Not in this store. Trust me, I couldn't afford to hire someone until business picks up, but some fellows I know make 10 cents an hour at their jobs, some a lot more. Fishermen might make a little more. The fishing business is doing pretty well, but I reckon 70 cents an hour might be possible if a man were to really perform well. He paused. I'm not hiring. Let me make that perfectly clear. He thought for a moment, again surveying the room. Then sell me your store. How much? He could buy the store, run it, and hire this guy to work for him. Why not? The store is not for sale. He seemed to be very firm. That's your car in the lot, the black two-door? It is, and it's not for sale either. What does a car like that go for? That's kind of a personal question. How much? I'm in the market for a car. He needed to know just how far would $40,000 go. $500. And I'm from out of town. If I were to buy a house in this town, something modest, how much would it cost? I don't know what kind of a house you want. I'd imagine a man could live in a comfortable home down here for maybe $3,000, probably less. Sir, he slapped the doubloon on the counter. I want to thank you for your information. The man stepped back, looking somewhat apprehensive. You don't have to pay me for information, he said. Well, it's not just for information. I need some shoes. Is there any chance you have shoes, boots, any footwear? Have some rubber work boots in the back. Not in the best of shape, but you can borrow them. He had a third of a year's salary in his pocket. $500, enough to buy a car, and he knew where the mother lode was. He could start over, on his terms. Is there a clothing store nearby? Clausen's. He pointed to the right, maybe 4 blocks up on the main path. Railroad runs right through here, does it? It does. Runs to Key West and back to Jacksonville. You planning a trip? Well, maybe. Now you tell me, how do you come upon an undershirt that mentions the name of my store and this date? How is that possible? Sir, I can't tell you. Maybe someday when you and I know each other better, I'll share the story with you. Sebastian walked to the rear of the store and returned with a pair of black, worn rubber work boots. Bobby hoped that these would be a very temporary wear. Be careful out there. There's a big storm brewing. You don't want to get caught in it. And please, take the gold piece with you. It's too much for some information and worn work boots. Are you sure? Friend, by the looks of you, you need it more than me. The boots were loose, and he felt the rubber slip on his feet. Damn, he was going to have blisters. He hated blisters. But in 4 blocks, he'd have a new wardrobe. How did someone deal with this? Had he hit his head? Was he dreaming? He stopped. It was all happening too fast. An hour ago, he'd found more gold than he'd dreamed of. And when he surfaced, when he looked for the boat and the resort pier, what was different? He still had his T-shirt, his trunks. He still had the diving equipment, hopefully under palm leaves down by the water. What had caused this time warp? Nothing was altered. He was the same, but everything around him had changed. What was different? What was different was that he was free. He could start a new life, live like a king, or damn close, never have to work again, live off the coins. And every year they would increase in value. find a new love, buy a business if he wanted to, frequent the taverns and restaurants, and whenever he needed money, just take a dive. It was like having his own underwater bank account. Maybe he'd take the train and travel to Key West, hook up with a beach girl, and life would be great. And he thought about Linda. She'd wonder where he'd gone. Call the cops, but after a year, she'd give it up and find someone new. She was still attractive, sexy, smart, and maybe she'd fall in love. He still had feelings for her, but it was just the situation at home, the firing, the stress. He didn't want to go there, but if she fell in love, with his newfound wealth, he could start a new chapter. Some women would be attracted to his free spending spree and then get to know the real Bobby James, and it would be like his 20s all over, only this time with some serious capital. And still he wrestled with the question of what was new. What was new? He thrust his hands in his pocket and felt the pieces, heavy pieces of gold that jangled when he walked. Well, the gold was new, the only thing that was new. Had these few gold pieces changed time? No, he didn't want to even think that. Here he was about to set off on a new adventure, a rich man's dream. And what if these few gold coins were the answer to his present and his past? He turned left instead of right, just to check and see if his equipment was still under the palm tree. His connection to another dimension, another time zone. Damn, he was this close to a new identity. No job, no cell, no money worries. In just a few blocks, the rubber boots were rubbing his feet raw. And he finally took off the footwear, tossing it into the brush as he left the dusty road and started back toward the beach. In a short time, he recognized the palm and 2 dead fronds that lay undisturbed. His diving gear was just as he'd left it. He figured he could try it, inflate his vest and swim back to the gold, dive down, and see what transpired. The answer to his newfound freedom, his ties to the past or future, depending on how you looked at it. Strapping himself onto the tank, fixing the mask, and adjusting the computer, he figured he'd about had enough air to go down and 5 minutes to surface, calling it rather close. He swam out straight off the palm to where he thought he could remember being, and then let the air out of his vest. He was playing with the universe, and he had no idea where he was going to end up. Maybe nowhere. Maybe there would be nothing left of him. Maybe he'd come back and his fate would be decided. He would be stuck in Isla Mirada forever. He dove down, searching for the coral reef. The colors, the contours were there, and he saw his rock of coins. Palming the coins, he closed his eyes and threw them at the boulder, watching them bounce off and land on the ocean floor. He made a mental picture, wanting to remember exactly what it all looked like, and then he shoved off, breaking the surface 20 feet up. "Dude, I was just about to come and get you." Tony was 10 feet away in the small craft. He shook his head, pulling up his mask. "Ran into a little trouble down there. Glad you're safe. Wouldn't be good for business. Something happened to you." You have no idea, he thought. No idea at all. "I got some good news for you." "Good news?" "Strange thing. Drew called. Said a lady came in the store, saw your sign, and was propped up by the counter. She offered to pay your $1,000 price. I think Drew might have marked it up $100, but dude, he sold your sign. You've got the $1,000. His head was reeling. Who was she? He'd never seen her before. Drew said she looked like some gypsy lady, long dress, scarves, definitely not a diver. He called Linda on the way home. "I've got the money from the gun. He wasn't interested in the other ones." "That'll help. Listen, Bobby, I think we need to talk when you get here." "Talk?" "I've been a little rough on you. If we sit down and do some serious planning, I think we should be able to work through this. I talked to Gene at the bank. He's willing to work with us. And it sounded good to him. Work through this, get their life back on track. "You never used a crystal ball?" the girl asked. "I never saw anything in the ball," the spider lady said, "just crystal." "But you believe in the cards?" The teenager pointed to the tarot cards, now piled neatly on the small kitchen table. "Sometimes the cards can give me a clue, Allison," she said. "They can lead me in the right direction, but nothing ever guarantees the future. There's always the power of free will. Things can change in an instant." "Good to know," the young girl said. "I'll stop by next week, okay? I look forward to it." She watched the girl ride away on her bike, her dark hair trailing behind her. The conversation had been lively, based around an early video game in the front yard. An antique by the young girl's standards, she knew the girl the moment she'd ridden up a path a month ago. She didn't know her at all. It was all mixed up. Encouraging Rose to climb up her arm, she walked outside. She sat on an antique ceramic barber chair in front of her listing trailer and picked up an almanac, thumbing to Labor Day, 1935. The biggest hurricane in history hit Isla Mirada, Florida, with winds blowing 200 miles an hour. A 20-foot tidal wave destroyed the town, killed over 600 people, and tore up the railroad, never to be rebuilt. She closed her eyes and reclined in the chair. You just never knew. Thank you for listening, if you did. And again, it's some mistakes, a little bit here and there, but we've got 13 stories, and I think we're going to continue putting them out to the tune of one every week or 2 weeks. So stay tuned, and thank you.